This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
It's going to do some technology magic, I understand, in the next few seconds. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay. So I have some PowerPoints, but really this is a storytelling session. And the story, of course, for me was this integration of the two parts of my life, which I'll share with you. Clearly, one stream was my digital stream in my outer world and my technology work for the last 35 years. In paid work, and probably I from when I was very young, already was searching the radio for voices and plugged into the media, plugged into technology, plugged into electricity as sort of part of my inner vision. And parallel with that, of course, is my also about 30-year spiritual practice, meditation work, and study of theosophy and Sufism, practices and metaphysical work. And these things are really separate parts of my life until I really had an experience, which I'll share with you in a minute, that really helped me bring these two things together. And you know, if I had to give you the 30-second synopsis, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then spend a few hours telling them and remind them, the core philosophy, the core principle of what I believe is that all of the universe, all of our creation, ourselves, and that which is about us, and quite appropriately in a metaphysical library, to take a metaphysical approach that says these are all the same one thing. They're just manifested in different ways. And so if we believe that consciousness both holds our sense of who we are individually and consciousness creates this world around us, then the technologies in the world around us are very much the same part of our consciousness. And that if we have individual levels of consciousness, that our levels of consciousness and our levels of development and the things we do in spiritual practice are reflected to us outside. And they're the same way they're reflected in art, and they're reflected in poetry and music, in mystical seers who come down the street and are connected to things much bigger than us. I believe at this time and place called now, they're also reflected to us in this old marriage of electricity and communications, this marriage of electricity and radio and fiber optics with our own inner hunger to be connected to the divine. And then that's manifesting itself in these outer technologies. But these outer technologies have lessons for us in both ways. They affect us, and someone asked me about cell phones and media, and you know, we have lots of literature about technology's effect on our consciousness, on our physical bodies. But if technology and consciousness are really part of that same continuum, then I also believe that our consciousness is creating these technologies. And when we look at these technologies, we can see both our light and our shadow. We can see our dreams, our nightmares, our aspirations, our vision of what the future could be for human consciousness, what actually mystics, spiritual teachers have told us for thousands and thousands of years. We're creating in silicon, and we're creating in wire, and we're creating in light pulses that travel the planet. And it also holds for us the mirror of that part of ourselves that we're not quite ready to let go of, our shadow selves. And it holds it at different levels. So that's the lecture, and the rest of it is illustration. So let's see what we have here. Page down. Hope that works. So this isn't me, but I was a kid, as they say, who always loved radio, and my uncle used to park me on top of, my mother would bring me to my uncle's house, and I would spend time in front of this big Philco radio. It was probably 3 times larger than this illustration. And literally from age 2, sort of searching the dials, turning the knobs to learn Morse code, to understand the signals that were coming at me. This is, of course, pre-computers. That's one of these kids that radio was the medium that affected my life. And even when I was sitting in at Columbia, this is 1968, Low Library, and I'm the kid scratching his beard, still trying to figure things out. I think I was 18 at the time. Anyhow, even there, I spent, when I wasn't in school or occupying buildings, they could find me at the school radio station running programs late at night. And I worked in theater. I worked as a lighting designer, a motion picture projectionist, a follow spot operator. I worked in television as a camera person. I worked as a video editor. Later, in this last project I did, worked with the internet community, the Internet 2 community, which is the research internet that's not really for the public, and with the research internet connecting a number of land-grant university PBS stations around the country to share content and move things back and forth, proving that we could send video over the internet. This was about 15 years ago when people said it couldn't be done, and I was part of that project working on that. So my wife loves to take me out to look at the wildflowers and all the, this is a little abstract, to see the colors on wonderful walks, and she's actually a professor of textiles and design at the University of Wisconsin, and she loves to do dyeing and natural things, and so she's picking flowers and we're putting them in the basket that she's going to come home. But of course, when I'm not looking down, I'm spending most of my time calculating the cable TV line loss and the wires up her head. And one good thing I can say about that is that one year we got really lost in the woods, and I could say that only because I knew the code numbers on the amplifiers hanging off the trees could I find our way back home. So the left brain and the right brain, the masculine and the feminine, worked together, and we got ourselves home safe and sound.
You mean it wasn't the stuff that grows on the north side of the tree?
We looked for that. She was trying to figure out if the flowers are bending in certain ways, and I said, well, that's an 8-port DA hanging from the tree, and that's a 16, and we're going to just work our way back to the trunk amplifier. So, this kind of being out in the body, out in the world, and also connected to things, paralleled my own fascination and my own interest, of course, with the energy body. These are some of Alex Gray's drawings, and of course we've seen many of them in our metaphysical work. And again, the idea here is that if we believe that the human body has an energy field or has levels of awareness and consciousness, and we talk about these things connected at different levels, then why not the energy field of the whole planet having the same thing? And we're creating that nervous system of the planet through our technologies. So I was working on my own spiritual development, starting with TM back in 1967, 68, and moving on through various teachers and practices, and sort of culminating in an energy healing school about 10 years ago, again, learning to view auras and hold light for people and scan fields and look beyond the beyond. And teachers would come up and start talking about these very esoteric concepts and draw charts and pictures. And I realized that I could explain it much better using my technical books than they were doing. And these things started bubbling around in my mind about how can I bring the two together. And I struggled with it, and I really had a hard time until one night I had this very powerful dream. By now I haven't betrayed my New York Jewish background. I can only talk like this. Anyhow, I was in New York, and I dreamed that I'm going up to the light, and I got the tunnel, and the gates of heaven are waiting, and all the guides and the masters and the helpers are up there. But of course, being of the ethnic stock that I am, what are they doing? They're all going, oi, 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 oi. And I'm getting closer and closer, and they're going, oi, oi, what have you done? What have you done? And I'm looking, and there's the Akashic Records, the great statement of my purpose in life and the metaphysical level. And it says, he's supposed to go down and work with light. And what has he done? Follow spot operator, motion picture projectionist, lasers, fiber optics. And they're all going, we told you to go work with the light, but we didn't really mean it in such a physical way. And I realized that for a lot of us, we have these kind of, our direction is there for us, but we kind of get the metaphor wrong. We're close, but we didn't quite get it. So I came out of that thinking, well, what does that mean? Maybe if I'm going to combine technology and spiritual work, I should open up a psychic hotline or go around doing, technology demonstrations. But I looked in my heart and I realized that I was not going to, this was not going to work through the process of doing that. And out of that came this plan for Digital Dharma. I said earlier that, that if we think about technology as holding the nervous system for the planet, Marshall McLuhan, writing in the late 50s through the mid-60s, made the case looking at the media, and he was particularly there in Canada watching television sweep across Canada. And he was watching people And he was deeply influenced by Louis Mumford, who wrote Technics and Civilization, and of course spiritually by Teilhard de Chardin. And Teilhard de Chardin, Catholic mystic, really believed that the 21st century would be a time when human consciousness would finally evolve to a global brain, to that time in which we would finally connect with each other. And as a Christian, he felt that that would be the singularity point, and that would be the time in which the divine would finally come, because our consciousness would finally be big enough and able to hold it. So McLuhan, as I say, even though he was writing as a media person, he was actually a Catholic mystic influenced by mystical thinking. And so his idea was that the technologies of the media affect the nervous system, and they affect the balance of the nervous system, the ratios of the nervous system. And they affect not just the way we act and think, but the way we feel, the way we perceive. And again, this is not, a new concept, but he really believed that this process was evolutionary. And again, taking from Chardin, taking from Sri Aurobindo, another Indian mystic, again, believing that this time of consciousness that we're in now would be a time where we would finally evolve the technologies and the nervous systems to begin to finally connect with each other collectively and corporately to some new way of understanding. And again, both of McLuhan and Chardin, Sri Aurobindo felt it was going to happen in our biology, in our cells, and in our DNA, that we were going to begin to evolve tools and mechanisms of understanding. So for me, this issue of connecting the media and technology was very clear, that if our systems of communication, our transmitters and our radios were out there, that if we take the metaphor and we're really willing to dance back and forth, and this was the chakra reference, that in my energy studies, we really believed that one way of understanding the body, and one way of understanding the spiritual yearnings of the body, was to think of the energy field around the body as having these 7, from a technology point of view, like we call them transponders. These are transmitters and receivers that take in a signal at one frequency and respond back in another. So in my technical work, we were always putting up transponders on satellites, on fiber optic networks to amplify, receive, and bounce back. And so the chakra model in Vedic medicine, of course, is that the nervous system have these ganglia, and that this is the portal, the transponder between the inner world and the outer world, between our esoteric understandings, our emotional life, our spiritual vocabularies, and our physical body. And so we can talk about communicating at these different chakra levels. And what I want to do today is really kind of talk about this inner-outer, that which we're in and that which we're out. And for that, I'm indebted to, again, a vocabulary of Ken Wilber in integral studies. And this is not going to be, we could spend hours trying to understand Ken Wilber, and I'm not going to do that tonight. So I try to come up with the core piece that I wanted to talk about. And this chart is even going to go away, but the key thing that Wilber says is that if we're trying to understand the evolution of a society and the evolution of consciousness, we can start almost anywhere. We can start with social organization, how governments are organized, how systems are organized, and we can find a correlative understanding of that in how things are being written, how art is being made, how culture is created, so that the novel came at a certain time, that the way we communicate came, and that the things that a culture holds dear, the memes of culture, the idea fragments that communicates culturally and socially, are both mirrors of this collective understanding. Now, in my studies in media ecology, we do that, and we sort of bring in this upper right corner, sort of the external stuff, and say, okay, if we put in television up here in the upper right, this exterior model, we can talk about how it's regulated and controlled, and we can talk about how it affects the culture. But Wilber's point is that we have to also go and say, how does it affect our insides? How does it affect our sense of spirit? How does it affect our soul? And that you can start anywhere. So that as we evolve, in his ladder of consciousness and his hierarchy models, that as consciousness evolves inside ourselves, we're going to create different cultures, we're going to create different social things, we're going to behave, our bodies are going to change, the tools of our body are going to be different. So following that metaphor, and here's where Wilber and I negotiated for a year before he would decide if he was going to put his stamp of approval on the book. Ken likes the idea that the body stuff is in the upper right, the physical domain. And I kept saying, McLuhan says the media are extensions of the nervous system. So let's put the media in the upper right. Radio, television, the internet, these technologies as things, and then we could talk about their social impact, their cultural impact, and their inner impact. And we're still going around on that. And my agent, who was Ken Wilber's agent 25 years ago, said, screw him, publish the book, we're waiting too long. So I can't, maybe the second edition will resolve it. But my model is that I'm going to talk really about the dance between this interior, our intention, our inner life, the technology in the upper right, and down at the bottom how we reflect it in our culture and in our art and in our spiritual life. Okay.
What is that?
You want me to go back?
It says up there in the right-hand corner.
Oh, hold-ons. Yeah, that these things in turn are stacked on top of each other. So this is like a slice that at any one level, and we'll talk, I'm going to use 7 levels, but on the levels, that at each level, these things, A plus B, plus, they keep going on. Mm-hmm. So that in a slice of culture, we can stop, look at these things, go up another level, and look.
What do you mean by upper right and lower right? Upper right of what? Upper left of what? Lower left of what?
Of the circles.
Okay, so it's just in a circle.
This is just in the circle interior. I really didn't want to spend a lot of time on Wilbur stuff other than the metaphor. But the point was he was saying is that on the individual level, we have our interior life, the life of our soul, the life of our spiritual beliefs. And on an individual level, we have our exterior manifestation. And then we have it collectively in society. We have an inner and outer.
I just wasn't sure if the circle was a specific thing, like a head or a...
Oh, no, it's just slicing and dicing. And
Okay.
Is there any significance to the inner and outer circles?
well, he's sort of saying that if we, on the outside, if we use a pronoun, we talk about I. It's just to hold I, we, it, and its. So in culture, we talk about its. We're objectifying. And in our community, we talk about we and the values we share. And then, of course, internally, it's I have these values, and it, meaning the things you can point to. So I'm putting technology in the it quadrant. The technology is the it. It affects the I, our inner life, and it affects we, both in our art, our culture, and our regulations. So I think am I going the wrong way? Yes. Okay. So what I'm going to do is this dance between the book and this model of the chakras. And so most of the next bunch of slides really just hold our awareness at these different levels. So this is sort of the end, in some ways, the bridge from sort of the broad understanding, the structure that I'd like to share with you. And then I really like to just invite you, as we go through this, whether you do any kind of meditative practice, whether you do any kind of spiritual work, or this is all new to you, if I'm talking about First Chakra, I'm going to be talking about metaphors of aliveness, metaphors of who we are inside, and then dance back and forth to the technologies. If you don't want to use chakras, you can use the spiral dynamics model of colors. You can use evolutionary theory, Maslow's hierarchy of child development. I know we've talked about other models. They all apply. But basically this idea of evolution of consciousness. So at the first level of consciousness, first level of understanding, Anodia Judith, who's a mentor of mine, who wrote Eastern Body, Western Mind, looking at the chakras as sort of psychological models, talks a lot about this first level of understanding, and the first chakra as really that place that holds boundaries, that holds our beginning. I like to think of it as, this inner transmitter down at our base that sends out our signals of aliveness, that dots and dashes that welcome us onto the planet. First level consciousness is about setting boundaries. It's saying, I am here and you're external. So in child development is really that place in which individuation first begins in its scary way, that I'm separate from the mother, that I'm separate from the background. And it's the first level of creating sacred space. It's the first level of moving into separation and into being, is the willingness to have a boundary of what's outside and what's inside. So first level consciousness as reflected in technology, for me that was the dots and the dashes of these weather beacons, the lighthouse lights flashing on and off, always associated with that. That's Hebrew, hineni, I am here, O Lord. That's what Abraham said to the divine, that first statement of saying, I am present. And so we do it in I am practices, or we do it in mantras that tell us we are here. We do it in that first level affirmation. So first level work is about coming into being, coming into aliveness, being seen, and being willing to be seen. And it's technology stories, in the Telegraph, Samuel Findlay Breezy Morse, in sending that first telegraph message from Washington to Baltimore, tapped out, what hath God wrought? This is a birth signal. This is that statement of aliveness. And so the telegram always associated with safety, with money, with security, with those first level concerns of who we are, that was put to use technologically for those very concerns: safety, money, alarm systems, coordinating military actions, connecting it to the stock market. The old days, the stock exchange ticker was really a telegram thing inside of a glass bell jar. That was like, if you have an old Monopoly game, that was the telegraph key inside, clicking in the stockbroker's office before computers. So the dots and the dashes associated with our money conditions. And when the telegram coupled to the radio, what was its first use? Well, its first use, again, was to replace the lighthouses and to try to send signals out to sea. And the first we association of the telegram and the radio telegram with first chakra concerns came with the sinking of the Titanic. And there are many stories about the image of the Titanic going down and the radio man sending the dots and dashes, and the person in the nearest ship, the Carpathia, not listening because it was nighttime and there was no rule that they had to listen to the radio at night. So the first international treaty for radio was a treaty that said every country that has a ship that can carry more than a certain number of people had to have a radio room and had to have a radio operator listening all the time, listening for those signals, listening for aliveness. So first level consciousness is about listening. It's about listening for those signals. And so in an in an all-day class, we do this piece and we then drop into kind of first chakra. And I would just suggest that maybe you look at your neighbor for a second, and without any emotional content, without anything else, just be aware and just be conscious, oh my God, there's another being in the room, and kind of energetically acknowledge their beingness, because that really is that first level work. And people whose first level isn't acknowledged and aren't grounded, wind up having lots of problems and act out in all kinds of ways. We do drumming circles, to say, I'm here. And we watch our kids on text messaging devices sending little telegrams. Where are you? I'm on the corner. What are you doing? I'm having an ice cream. Where are you? I am here. So I like to think of text messaging, the phenomena of text messaging is really, really appropriate for that pre-adolescent coming into being, drawing those boundaries, sending a message of aliveness without being too intimate, because it's like the little telegram that says, here I am, stop. Where are you? Stop. Those little dots and dashes of being. So first chakra meditations, first chakra visualizations, first chakra externalization in communication is about these little messages of aliveness. And I would suggest that the shadow of that is the little blackberries strapped to everybody's waist, never allowing them to breathe without getting another task to do, another piece of work. That ordering of life through those dots and dashes of command and control. And so our ability to look at that part of ourselves that hooks into that. When we don't have good first chakra connection, we're like the lighthouse is extinguished. We don't know where we are. We're lost at sea. And so I play with those powerful metaphors. I'm going to jump to second. And you can interrupt. We'll do some Q&A, but if I'm really off somewhere, you could stop me. Just want to try to keep the flow as much as we can.
You were saying about how the communications between ships, it was replacing the lighthouses, but how much after all that did radar come in, where they just didn't,
right,
do the radio, but they also
well, radar of course was to recognize. Radar is again a perfect first chakra meeting, because what does radar do? It sends out a pulse, bing, and hits against you and comes back. So yeah, that radar's again that first level statement of where are you? Bang, I am here. You know, and we'd like to think about sending our energetic radar out, and does it hit anybody, or are we lost? Just keep sending and sending. People who have lost their first chakra connection just keep sending and are never found. And so our work of that is about grounding and boundary and finding that place of being seen. So Telegram had one problem. They can only send one signal over the wire at a time, and the people developing, working on that technology in the 1870s, 1880s, had the idea, and Edison was really pushing this, that, well, maybe if we send a telegram to different tuning forks, so each tone we could send, and then we could figure out a way that when we strike the key, the telegram key, it will strike a tuning fork at a tone. It will resonate with a tuning fork at the other end. Then we could send 10 signals at the same time, because we would, you know, anybody who's heard a modem go, you know, we can sort of send this thing there. And so a lot of them were trying to create these telegrams and experimenting with how they could send lots of different frequencies across the telegram wire at the same time. There are a lot of patents for musical telegram devices. And one man, a teacher of the deaf named Alexander Graham Bell, experimenting in his laboratory with the musical telephone, telegram spilled some battery acid on himself, and the supposed first screamed into this device that had all these coils in it. And anybody who watched the great movie with Don Amici from 1935 or whatever it was, allegedly Bell says, "Mr. Watson, come here, I need you." He's burning a hole in his clothes. And so the telephone, you know, in its history was a medium from the beginning of relationship, of someone calling out and asking for someone else to come. I mean, its apocryphal story of its birth was not this "what hath God wrought," but a relationship of need, a relationship of help. So the telephone had always been associated with this realization that you had to have somebody on the other end in relationship. And telephone and relationship has, back in that quadrant of history of the we and the culture, has always been kind of associated with the second chakra, light and shadow, about hunger and need for association and intimacy. Who we are in the telephone, our voices drop. We move to intimacy. We move to almost an intimate, sensual relationship with our partner, and I'll explain that picture in a second. And we discover from brain scans that people who, when they're on the phone after a while, the visual cortex stops processing new data coming in and starts actually holding images of the person that we're talking to, which is, of course, why people talk on the phone and they gesture and they point and they laugh and they grimace and they make mimics, and why they drive their SUVs into other people, because they're dreaming. They're in this intimate space with your lover. And when you're with your lover, even if it's a business associate, but on the energetic level, this is a lover relationship, we shut out other realities. So second chakra has always been associated with kind of intimacy and creating this private space, you know, up until the last few years with the screaming and the cell phones and with the little Bluetooth receivers and people just jabbering into the air. The physical act of cradling that telephone receiver is this whisper in the pillow and coupled up with something. And from its first 5 years, the telephone has always been associated as a sexual device. It was very scary in the 1890s. They put the telephone in a little box and put a key on it, and they said, "We can't let women use the phone." Can't let women use the phone. Can't let women use the phone because they're going to use it for social purposes. They're going to connect and talk to each other, because the people inventing the phone still thought it was a telegraph, and it would be used to give very brief business messages and you'd hang up. Save the cost of having a phone, a key operator and the little boys on the bicycles who would deliver messages. And so the phone was kept under lock and key because they didn't want it to turn into a domestic device. And the women, 1880s, 1890s, were the queens of the domestic space. And they didn't want to give women domestic power. It was also considered a sensual and sexual instrument because young boys and girls could talk on the phone, and the wire left the house. And the wire left the house and went to someone else's house. And in 1880s and 1890s, you had to have a business card, and you sat in the front room. And if your beau was with you, you were chaperoned, and thus communications were watched all the time. So girls could energetically leave the house. Girls could talk on the phone in their nightgowns, in bed. This was porno of 1890. And there are articles in the technology magazines about unplugging the phone, which we still do, at least I did in my house, so my kid couldn't get on the phone after certain hours because they didn't know how to stop. So the telephone has always been, I like to think of it as this metaphor about intimacy, a metaphor about the feminine sides of communication. If the first chakra is this dots and dashes, a masculine command and control, left brain processing, the telephone is a right brain, harmonic, musical, moon, water, technology. It also created jobs for women. It was, well, other than going into the sweatshops or becoming a school teacher, the telephone industry became the major employer of educated women by the turn of the century. Those telegraph boys cursed the customers, played practical jokes, put bubble gum in the switchboards, and were kicked out of the business of being in the telephone business, replaced by women. And so the telephone and women have this very intimate connection from the beginning. And I like to think that if we talk about second chakra, consciousness, second chakra is about relationship. It's about analog mirroring. It's about musical tone. It's about harmonics. It's about induction. It's about moving back and forth with each other, which of course is what happens electrically in the earpiece and the mouthpiece. And I think about cell phone addiction, cell phone use, even amongst young people, when they graduate, as it were, from first chakra identity issues into being risky to have friendship and relationship. The text messaging gets put away and the voice starts picking up. So telephone and second chakra and voice is a very powerful metaphor of where we are in that level. Everybody all right on telephone?
I remember doing it with the switchboard. And, yeah.
Yeah, I would suggest, actually I have a great, in the book I have a great, the book has chapters, and so talk about the technology, talk about the esoterics and the spiritual stuff, and at the end of each chapter is a visualization and a healing meditation, because again, part of my fantasy again was try to bring these domains together and use the vocabulary of technology, not as something out there to tell us a story about ourselves, but also to help us heal inside. So there's a wonderful second chakra meditation of sitting in front of that switchboard and pulling the cords out of all those negative relationships. Boom.
That was a certain power if you were a switchboard.
And cord cutting is a great shamanic, right. So that metaphor of cutting the cords is not new, let us say.
Yes.
And I think there may be older women in the community who know all about cutting cords and pulling cords long before we created some of those rituals. Huh?
Create new connections.
And create healthy connections. So in the, as you say, in the book, there's a wonderful second chakra. We go down in the equipment room and find these old switchboards and start pulling the cords. And of course, the second chakra is where the inner child lives. And so I have a great meditation about tuning into that voicemail of the wounded child and finally listening with full compassion, hitting that play button, and of course also erasing the negative messages that we might have heard. So it's a wonderful, as you say, telephone piece on that. So then they thought, well, we get the telephone and we have the radio telegraph, so why don't we hook the telephone that now works to the radio telegraph, and we could send lots of messages without wires. We could send messages to ships at sea. We could send messages where it's too expensive to pull wires. And just as the telephone sort of came out of the failure of the telegraph, what would be the failure of a business model of hooking up the telephone to radio telegraphy so we could send telephone messages over the radio? I'm the Marconi company and I'm going to sell you 5 minutes of radio telephone time. Why might you not want to use it?
Not private.
It's not private. Okay. So of course all the little hobbyist kids with their Quaker Oats boxes and crystal sets could listen in to everybody's private conversation. And so the business case didn't quite work. People didn't want to use the radio telephone as a substitute because second chakra is intimate and private, all of a sudden we're putting it out for everybody to hear. So the model started to fail. And the idea then was that we can use, maybe we can make a case, a business case out of this idea that maybe more people want to listen than transmit. And so instead of thinking that I'll have a private phone conversation, maybe I'll put a musician on that phone and people will listen. Or I'll put a preacher, or I'll put a poet, a writer, or whatever. And out of that model, the telephone plus wireless became radio, became broadcast radio. And broadcast radio, in its very structure, is a third chakra medium, because it's the one to many. It's that loudspeaker in the center that says, here I am, I have a message to share with all of you. It's the metaphor of our own empowerment. And the light and shadow of that empowerment, of course, is first of all in that quadrant that's about culture and civilization. Government recognized immediately that whoever had the power of the radio had dominant power and social control. So licensing of radio became a very blatant control question of who society was going to legitimate as worth having a voice. Now in Europe, the king is the king and the queen had the voice. So radio was given to the post office and royal charters were given that the government had the responsibility of controlling who got on the radio. It was a very national hierarchical model. In America in the 1920s, as George Bush is creating today, the wealth determined who got on the radio. So anybody who had those early days, if you were a school, if you were a church, if you were a labor union, if you were an individual who wanted to talk, all those licenses were pulled and they were called propaganda stations. So if you had a propaganda station, you were knocked to a very low power, including most university stations. This was, and big companies were given the licenses instead, and they said, well, the market decides. I think this is a familiar cry. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody has anything to say, they'll buy time on the radio, and those who could afford it will buy time. And so in America, commercial radio started from the beginning, and educational radio, church radio, union radio, minority group radio was all kicked out as being not legitimate. And so fighting over who gets access to radio has always been a social power struggle. And whether it was access to the licenses, access to music formats, many of us with a little bit of gray hair remember the 1960s and getting access to FM when the government opened up the FM band and the owners of the radio stations were told, you have to program these things separately. They used to play the same AM and FM together. They had to program them separately. They didn't want to spend any money to program them separately, but there were all these long-haired kids with their Grateful Dead records and folk music and things like that, and said, sure, come in and make radio. So, our generation had it with taking over FM. Today's kids have it with hip-hop. Hip-hop was always, from its birth, was a metaphor about power, because the kids who created hip-hop literally stole power from the streetlights in front of their housing projects in New York, opened the boxes on the bottom. They didn't want to pay the electricity in the building, wired up the turntables outside, and then sampled other people's records to create music tracks to dance to and sing to. This incredible metaphor of we're claiming our power literally through the electricity and literally by whose music that we're controlling. So the dance of format and the dance of who has power in society, I like to see that as that outer third chakra work that we're doing. And whether it's pirate radio, where people say the hell with government control, we'll start our own, whether it's fighting over formats, radio has always been associated, as you say, with power. The positive, Franklin Roosevelt, fireside chats, the poet, the artist, the community person that we listen to and we give our power to, just as you're voluntarily doing it with me tonight in this room. Radio is that place in which we sit in the shamanic circle for the griot, for the storyteller, and we return back to somewhat of a dependent role. We intentionally lessen our autonomy to say, educate me, fill me, share something with me, you've got the chair. Well, we know the shadow side of that, of course, is put Hitler up here, and Goebbels, put Rush Limbaugh, put right-wing hate radio, put your Rwanda radio machete, where the government told everyone where to go to kill the Tutsis. All of these, the Tutsis. These were all uses of radio. In the Mideast, radio still calling for jihad. Fundamentalists love radio. Radio is this perfect medium to scream and damn others with, because it's this medium of power. So I like to think radio holds our repressed desires in the third chakra, that desire to be our own radio station, to go around the world listening to our music, having our way in the world at its best, because we have a gift to share, our power, our autonomy, our song, our music, our art, our words. And at its worst, of course, I'm just going to crank that volume up louder and louder until I knock you down with my third chakra. I haven't refined it, and it doesn't hold a particular part of my inner life. It just holds my hunger for power. Let's turn that around and say, what does that tell us about our insides? Many of us have followed one guru after another, kind of tuning our spiritual radio for the next voice that's going to tell us what to do. So radio is this, again, perfect medium to say, whose voice are we listening to on the spiritual domain? Is it a voice outside of us? Who are our teachers? What's the voice that I listen to inside? Is it that voice of, you're no good? We do all kinds of incredible healing work in our different projects to push out those damning voices that we need to get rid of. In spiritual practice, we do affirmation, we do wazifa, we recite the rosary, we do kirtan, we do mantra, we do all kinds of things to change the tape in the background, to change that third chakra radio station we're listening to. And whether we're downloading it into iPods today, where we don't really need the radio stations anymore, I think the metaphor still holds. What's on our playlist? What are we listening to? What are our kids listening to? So, in or out, the metaphor's there. It's about power, and at its best, our autonomy, and at its worst, say both our anger and our negativity and our subjugation of our true selves to someone else's voice. Okay. The heart chakra. We love the heart chakra. Heart chakra is that center in the middle. The lower chakra is really dealing with our embodiment, our separation into the body, our sense of relationship to others, our power, our autonomy. The upper chakras, or levels of awareness or stages of development, are about transpersonal spiritual work. But these middle ones are about our relationships to each other. So fourth chakra, communication, is about seeing the other as a face of myself, taking the other and seeing a bit of me in your eyes and your eyes and your eyes, and that ability not to just externalize you purely on an operational basis, that you exist only to get in my way or to do my will, but to see a tiny bit of the divine or see myself. I mean, this is compassionate work at its best, to understand the pain of the other is my pain. And so from an evolutionary point of view, I like to think that television sort of burst on the scene at a time when, after World War II, after the collapse of nationalism, after the end of the screaming and the yelling, in this kind of, oh my God, the hope of the United Nations, the dream of one planet, the dream of nations getting together, this technology burst on the scene, and it put in everybody's room this little window to look through and invite into the living room this flickering image. Again, this is the time McLuhan was writing, and when he told it about the global village, it really was this place of the fishbowl into the other. And that television at its best, Edward R. Murrow in the 1960s, See It Now, Person to Person, these were programs that took us into the lives of the migrant farm workers. CBS Reports took us into the Vietnam War later, showing us the effects of our bombing on others. And it's no surprise that people argue the television, the living room war. Vietnam was the living room war because it came into the homes, and that it touched people's hearts in a way that they couldn't externalize those peasants the way we had done with the Japanese and the enemies in the past, and that it helped speed up the end of the war. It's no surprise that the current administration does not want television in Iraq, and when CNN was there showing the bombing of Iraq during the first Gulf War, they pulled the plug as quickly as they could and threatened and called those people disloyal because they showed the bombs over Baghdad. And so television's always had this, at its best, this idea of seeing the other as some part of ourselves. That's what we, at our best in our hearts, that we want to do. But what does it mean? What does the Buddha tell us about, and this is the liberal dilemma, it's what Ken Wilber called boomeritis, or the mean green meme is in his model. That we go through, we all sing together, we sing Kumbaya, and we're going to make this better world by just caring about each other. What's the consequence of going out in the world with an open heart if we really saw the other all the time, for most of us? Anybody?
You lose your own boundaries.
So the boundaries are gone, that would be there, but what's the impact of you going out and seeing the other in their true state?
It heightens your feeling about the world. You're
Right.
You can't be in yourself.
You can't be in yourself. So what is that feeling if you really understood the nature of the world? What does Buddha say?
Either compassion
Compassion.
or a broken heart.
Right, okay.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love is the positive, right? We flow with this unconditional love, compassion, that's the goals. But I would like to say that the shadow of the heart and the shadow of television, and why television works the way it does, is that if we go out into the world with this compassionate, open heart, we have to see that we're responsible for suffering. And that the clothing that we wear, the gasoline we put in our cars, the air that we breathe, all of these things have consequences on other people's lives. And those of us in the West are challenged. And Buddha said, if you go out with a true open eye, you will see that the nature of the planet is suffering. That no matter what you do, you either cause suffering or it affects suffering. And so you said the broken heart, right? In Sufi practice, we do the zikr of the broken heart. We break open the heart. And in the Madonna marries the immaculate heart, the images of this open heart, the feeling the world's pain. But most of us don't want to feel the world's pain. So television says, I have a solution for you, and it's called what? Commercials, right? Okay. So television understands that if you trigger the emotional body, most people, 99%, unless maybe they're Buddhas or whatever, are not going to be comfortable, whether it's happy or sad. They're living fully present in their emotional body. So we stuff it, and we stuff the heart. You open the heart, and you immediately got to get the candy bar. You open the heart, and you stuff it with things. And why we have spiritual experiences, and we immediately got to fill ourselves up, because most of us, that energy in the heart is a little too hard to cope. So television and consumption have always run neck and neck from the beginning. And it is no surprise that the television generation raised on television is the generation of obesity, generation of heart attack, the generation of lung cancer. These are all sort of in the chest kinds of issues about filling and stuffing.
Yes, I was wondering if you could talk at this point about the other side, like in other words, you're sort of intimating about how people view, the people view the reason why advertising exists from the viewer's point of view is in order to have their programs, but the flip side of it, from an advertiser's point of view, is the programming exists so they can have the advertising.
Right. Well, there's no, I mean, yes, I was taught, I worked in commercial and public television, I was taught you create the programs to lead to an action. You build up suspense, you leave the person unresolved emotionally. In public television, we want them to go out and do good things, give money, aid the homeless, change their behavior. In commercial television, we don't have to work that hard. Change the behavior simply means stuff yourself. And so wherever television has gone, it's destroyed local communities and turned them into consumption. And when George Bush says, what should we do after 9/11 and go shopping, this is the dark side of television. But I want to remember, this is, of course, my positive view of television, and then we'll take a break, because the TV, this is the middle, so it's a good place to do that. The plus side of television, McLuhan saw that. He said television is, the sense that television extends is the sense of touch. He talked about television as being tactile, television putting us into contact with others. He believed it was because of the scanning lines, the odds and the even lines, the interlaced field of television. We scan the lines 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then we go and do the even lines, and we're constantly dancing back and forth. It's called interlace scanning. And he believed that we were actually pulled into the image, complete it, every 30th of a second. So we were always seeing this half-empty glass that we were then filling up, which of course the flip side is that half-empty glass that we have to fill ourselves up. So television is this perfect fourth chakra metaphor, because again, I'm really not interested. I mean, there are others who do a better job socially criticizing television. I want to talk about television as a reflection of the heart.
Well,
So,
it's interesting because television, I mean, there's two parts of the heart, the upper, we call it upper lower astral, was emotional feeling. And television creates a lot of fear too.
well, television creates emotional uncertainty. So television is very happy, whether it's fear, joy, anger, whatever, but holding it in a place that people have anxiety about it.
And that's in our heart though, isn't it, right?
Yeah. It could tap third chakra fear and first level fear. But again, I want to really stay away from
First chakra
programs.
pulls the heart down to the lower level.
Right, right.
So,
But then television overloads it
Oh, yeah.
so that the emotion doesn't stay.
So that's the
Temporary.
point. The point about television, the reason commercial television works is most people are terrified of being congruent with their emotional body. And so we move us into the emotional body, and it has a consequence, either that we're in the emotional body and we do operate from compassion, and all of a sudden we have to put our money where our mouth is, and it hurts because I have to deal with that homeless person on the corner. I have to deal with the fact that I own 2 automobiles. I'm go down the list of what I would have to deal with. Or it's at that other level of just the stories might hurt.
So you turn it off.
Ideally, you turn it off before it hooks you into consuming things. But I'm also suggesting light and shadow. Television also taught us to see the other as something. Many people say that the civil rights movement, that's LeVar Burton and Roots, that LeVar Burton and Roots, that Star Trek, that Sesame Street.
And that's him in Star Trek too, right?
Yeah. And actually, there's a new movie that he's on the path of peace that LeVar Burton is doing.
Oh,
So,
no.
I mean, this is truly an avatar. I'm a beautiful man.
And you know
beautiful being.
Melodoma's going to be
Yeah.
on Friday.
Okay, you can give
He
the-
may be playing Melodoma in the movie on Melodoma's life.
Yes.
LeVar Burton.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, he made his money and he's giving back in a very beautiful way. So I just want to say that television also holds the best qualities of television, tries to remind us that we are all one family, and that the coupling, people, the book, the cultural creatives, and talking about that community was about television.
unity? Unity?
Well, not really unity. See, the unity.
Say love creates unity. When we
Yeah.
are in the love space, we unity with each other.
Yeah, at its best. But I'm going to talk about the upper qualities and what the difference of love, television love versus agape love versus unity love. So I just want to say that we can talk about the history of television. That's Edward R. Murrow in the corner there. That coming back into the heart, and I do want to then take a break, so I want to give us the upper one. That the story about the heart as this tipping point is that television reminds us to see the other. Television also reminds us about the instinctive reaction for most of us that we're uncomfortable with that seeing the other and being really compassionate to the other, and be conscious of how we stuff ourselves in different ways. Television also reminds us that we are one planet, we have to take responsibility. Watching television also reminds us of the shadow side of the broken heart, which is called codependence and emotional addiction, where my heart openness becomes dependent on your behavior. And so television has, or the heart chakra, the heart center, and again, that's why I want, my theme here is that there's light and shadow in all this. And there's a lot, the shadow of the heart center is why people go to AA and Al-Anon, is to break that I love you, so I'm going to stop living my life, and my heartbeat will be determined by your behavior. So enmeshment, odds and even lines, literally great metaphor of enmeshment, where my reality is enmeshed in your reality, is an important piece of doing heart center work. And we'll talk some more about the upper levels, but I want to say that in our criticism of television, I'd like to also say that we're criticizing some of our own naivete about well, at least in my generation, we'll all live communally and love each other, and we'll talk about the problems of that in the higher chakras. That singing, this is the singing kumbaya makes it all better.
My concern about television is it dictates my emotions.
It doesn't even care what your emotions are, is what I'm saying. It just wants you to get emotional, uncomfortable, so it could sell you something.
The program seems like there's some things are like fearful, and I
Right.
just have to get rid of television.
So,
Dictate my own emotions.
so one of the things I'm going to suggest, and then we can take some questions during one-on-one during the break, but the point that I'd like to make is that we can look at television as a reflection of our own heart. We can look at the fact that we want to progress in our own spiritual development, our own understanding beyond what Bill Clinton kind of represented. Bill Clinton represented, and I love the man, sort of both the light and shadow of that fourth chakra place. That's, I feel your pain, I love you, I'm compassionate. People would go into a room and he would talk to them, and he understood them, but he had no boundary control, and stuffing things was definitely on his agenda. And so that's been a critique of our generation to some degree, of the boomer generation, being very sensitive but not really knowing when to stop, taking care of themselves. So I want to talk about the chakras that the young people are telling us about to the other ones. I'll pick up your question, then we'll take a
I may
break.
not be here in the latter half.
Oh, you poor, come on
But
back.
one point I would like to make for people to contemplate is that thus far, most of the communication mediums that you have discussed, at least in the United States, are highly controlled. For instance, they all fall under the responsibilities of the Federal Communications Commission. There's not a telephone that is manufactured and delivered to consumer that is not traceable in some manner or another.
Now they record everything too.
Okay, so I want to just talk about the upper chakras, and as I said, this came out of radio regulation, who has power and control. And I guess I will just give you the hint that says, out of our desire to be able to bomb the Soviet Union after they blew up all the central power control, the challenge given to the RAND scientists was saying, how do we get a signal when we've lost the switchboards? And there are no switchboards. And the answer was, we get the signal by sending it out to the periphery, not the center. And that is the metaphor of the internet. It's the metaphor of community. It's the metaphor of trust. It's the metaphor of peer relationship. And so we'll talk about how we switch from a hierarchical model to a peer model, and the problems of light and shadow of that. We'll talk a little bit about digital virtual reality, and we'll talk about RFID and wireless devices as metaphors for other levels of consciousness. But let's take a break. So, I left us sort of hanging, as it were, as television is wont to do, build up to a precipice and then sort of leave you hanging there, which is kind of what I say is fourth chakra challenge. I left us at one of the things I ended with was this preview about internet technology. So, the internet came out of one of the darkest energetic desires. The internet was going to be the technology that would allow for mutual assured destruction, made the Cold War possible under its technical design, saying to the Soviets, you can blow up New York, you can blow up Chicago, you can blow up all the military bases, and we will still be able to send a signal to blow you up. And of course, they were inventing the similar pieces. So I like to think of that as that follow-on to what happens when everybody gets connected, because the principle of the internet from a technical point of view is that you take a message and you chop that message up into little pieces, packets, and those packets have an address on them where they're supposed to go, and they have some checksum at the back of the packet, which is really a mathematical code that says whenever you transform this data inside and perform a mathematical calculation, you better get this number when you're finished. And if you don't get that number, the packet is damaged, send a request, send me number 472, it's not quite right. Of course, this is done at near speed of light, so that this idea of missing a piece and requesting a new one is not supposed to take forever. And those of us who've watched video download to our computers or turned on a satellite or cable TV image and watched that image freeze and the pixels forming. These are the software waiting for all the packets to come and assembling them in the correct order. So imagine the idea was that if the center can't hold and we don't have leaders and we don't have something to focus around, that we can still send messages, and we send it not through the center, but we send it through the periphery, through the outside. A message comes and it's on its way to New York, but it gets as far as Atlanta and it says, you know, all circuits to New York are busy, but I'll send you to Florida because it's at least a little closer, and then eventually, sorry, I have to back up and send you somewhere else, and we'll eventually get you up there. This idea of these packets of information flowing over the network, not knowing who they are until they get to the end and are reassembled correctly, I really believe it's kind of the divine's joke about reincarnation. You know, we live our lives, we think we're separate, we hit here, we think this is happening to us, and we're framing it from this one thing. But of course they tell us that when we're in the oversoul place, we look down and put the packets all together and the message finally makes sense. So, you know, I just thought it was cute.
Yeah.
So we're creating this idea that, again, that says we can connect. The true way of getting information or getting a signal is to send it through peers. And so we begin to P-E-E-R, peers of the order, and through peer-to-peer communication. And peer-to-peer communication begins to destroy hierarchy. Peer-to-peer communication doesn't trust hierarchy. You're saying the technology that represented is a technology that was built on the assumption that hierarchy has collapsed. And so the internet and the design of the internet was a design of peer-to-peer communication. And yet it recognizes for us, if we hold this, remember I said, what about if the heart is totally unprotected and you go out and people are saying, you know, there's compassion and there's suffering, and someone said, but you'd be connected to everybody else. Well, fourth chakra dream is we're connected to everybody else and we sing Kumbaya. Fifth chakra reality is we're connected to everybody else and we get AIDS. We're connected to everybody else and we get herpes. We're connected to everybody else and we get Ebola. And we're connected to everybody else and we get staph. And so fifth chakra warning is about the danger of being connected without appropriate filters. The filter in consciousness is the filter of discernment. And all spiritual paths teach one that the next level of understanding is to go to that next level of, the next gradient of granularity, to discernment. To begin to say, just because everybody has a voice, it doesn't mean it's true. So the internet holds for us the core issue of truth speaking and truth telling, and who do we connect with. And the shadow of the dream of fifth level communication, I'm pointing to the throat, it's the fifth chakra, the center for speaking and hearing and listening and seeing. This is the center of communication. And the shadow of communication, of course, is lies, secrets. I mean, and the joy of communication, of course, is unity, and everybody understands everybody and we all see each other. So as we move sort of out of our naive state of we'll just all love each other and we'll have the welfare state, and we'll all, as you say, sing Kumbaya, was this understanding that maybe there are people who aren't quite at the same spiritual level. And maybe there are people who have issues that they have to work on. And maybe doing everything communally means the tragedy of the common, where somebody's lowest common denominator begins to control things. So we're forced not on that first level boundary setting, which is about power and individuation and control and very base kind of crude level, but ironically we move up into fifth chakra and we're also about boundaries. But it's permeable boundaries. It's permeable, boundaries. It's filters. It's firewalls. It's security software. It's about knowing who comes in and who goes out on the receive side. Because if we're going to be massively connected, then every ship, like from the Midwest, every ship that empties its bilge in the Great Lakes and drops zebra mussels in the water, every airplane that brings beetles bored in the wood on the pallets holding the freight that then decimate a forest. This is the time of interconnectivity. This is why global warming hits us now, because on some level we're finally waking up to this sense that we're all connected. And we're doing that in a place where, as I say, the shadow of being all connected are these diseases of infection, and the work of it is discernment. Someone said to me that I should at least read a paragraph or two from the book because, you know, you're hearing my philosophy, but you don't know how well I write. I think I read well. So on the radio, one has to fight to get to a microphone. On the web, access is not that issue. Now the challenge is ensuring that your voice won't be lost in the simultaneous broadcast of a billion other streams and podcasts. Television prods us to open our hearts to the world. And the internet reflects the fifth level challenge of dealing with the consequence of such openness. Always-on network connections have thrown us headfirst into a sea of memes, idea fragments that flow from brain to brain, reproducing like viruses, so that the net's constant chatter inevitably mimics the babble and distraction of our planetary monkey mind. We're discovering the hard way that living with such information glut without adequate boundary protection can be dangerous. In the words of critic John Lahr, quote, "We know too much and too little. The world is at once too close and too far away." So the internet is this medium that pushes us into the challenge of connection. And in the fifth level, I like to think about that quality of discernment. And the other thing is that we recognize that you can build the highest firewall. You can load your software onto your computer, as I did, that now takes me 4 minutes to get an email message because I have a high-speed internet connection. But by the time it finishes running all the security programs, I can get a cup of coffee and come back. So the security model isn't working, the security model of thick walls. What's working is the model of trust and trusted relationships. So one is invited to join one's peer circle based on initiation into a community, into some trusted action. And so on the internet, Google made its billions because people trusted its findings because it connected not just to a million hits, but to the hits that respected people looked at. And those that its algorithm was basically an algorithm of respect. So the internet and how we deal with the internet and how we deal with security, whether it's on a MySpace page, whether it's a Friendster group, whether it's a listserv, is all about how do you get entry into this community by doing some kind of act that makes someone give you a positive reference. It says, I can trust you because my best friend trusts you. And so we're going to see this emergence of circles of trust. We're beginning to see that now because this idea of everybody being connected isn't working, and the idea of having a million security systems isn't working either. So the phenomenon of MySpace, and again, the kids are learning that if they put their beer drinking contests on it and their nude pictures, that later when they go looking for a job and their employer Googles this. Because the other piece about the internet and the other piece about the shadow of the fifth chakra, light and dark, is on the fifth level of communication, you cannot have secrets anymore. And we say, oh, that's a great idea until the secrets are my own repressed and denied shame and my parts about myself that I don't want anybody to see, you know. But the positive, of course, is anybody with a webcam and an internet connection becomes a radical journalist and can begin to show the truth. The dark side, somebody just talked about, you know, is all the webcam, all the spy cams on everybody, all those internet registrations on every instrument that you have. So we're entering into this dance between the tools in the hands of those that are journalists or our seers, our hunger to see the truth manifesting in webcam broadcasts of civil liberties violations, of civil rights violations you can't hold, of the coffins coming home from Iraq, of the pictures of Abu Ghraib that got on the internet and broke our hearts. This is an internet phenomenon. This could not have existed before. And at the very same time, that shadow of the internet, of every move you make, every step you make is connected and being controlled. I'll be watching you. Every cake you bake, I'll be watching you.
But it's still predominantly one-way communication.
No, I disagree. The internet is predominantly two-way communication. The radical power of the internet is that, as we talked about the power of the periphery and social networks, is that people can begin to communicate with each other. And the battle, you know, again, the people want to look at the political domain and why we support things like net neutrality and the like. These are forces that are trying to turn the internet more into that one-way medium, where those with the biggest money get the fastest connections. But the radical part of the internet, and the irony of how the internet was designed, was saying if the internet turned into another radio or TV network, it wouldn't work, because it was designed on trust. And it was designed not to slow the flow of packets. So we're in this crucial dilemma on the technologies, and all I'm suggesting is that we're in the same crucial dilemma in our social relationships. We're at a time where every divorce lawyer, the first thing they do is seize the hard drive and put spy software on it, so that and I swear to you, the story in the New York Times just about 2 weeks ago about a seminar in New York for the divorce lawyers on how to track cell phone records, email records, to see what that other spouse has, a private ID or a phone address or whatever. So all the secrets of domestic life are spewed out on this network. All of the dark things we don't want to see, all the pornography, all the things about our own inner life that we haven't worked on are put out there. So I like to see the internet as really this issue of holding for us the challenge of putting your money where your mouth is about, oh yeah, I want to be connected, and we'll all be connected, because all being connected without discernment and without a process that says we can't have secrets, and I have to find a way. Ray Blanton has a book called Radical Honesty. How do we cope with that situation?
Yeah.
And this, and the internet's doing it for us. The internet is forcing us to say to our spouses, to our business associates, to our partners, that basically say, baby, this is who I am, and these are the things that I've done, and you might as well find out from me, because a couple of hits on the mouse, you'll find it from somebody else. Well, it's pretty scary to us, but I'm only suggesting that today's kids, it's a different domain. The shame, the darkness, the secret is not quite the same, and they're reacting to it by putting it in our faces and by doing this little dance about.
But you don't put it out as who you are. You put it out anonymously with another name.
Who's the you? That
I mean, this is what most people do. They use an acronym. They don't use, my name is Roger Armstrong, and this is what I believe, and this is my website. I don't want people to respond to me.
As you. Well,
I'm saying most of the things that I get are, they want an answer yes. They don't want anything else.
So the spam copyright Hormel Foods. I just did Austin, Minnesota. Just did a consulting job there. Okay, I'm now legal. Anyhow, this idea of viruses and spam and the one-way things that you're talking about being manipulated, having false names, gathering, stealing other people's emails, putting those on theirs to send you things about erectile dysfunction and cheap stocks or whatever it might be. Those are the shadows. All I'm suggesting is that it asks us that fifth level question: how do we do that in our own lives? How do we create personas that are not our true selves? And then on the other side is, how do we protect ourselves appropriately? I don't have a technical answer. I'm suggesting metaphysically it raises the conversation to something a little different than this is my boundary and this is who I am, because we're not going to make it to the next decade unless we find a way to interconnect with each other as a peer community, but we have to look at the shadows of that, and the internet holds the shadow as well.
Yeah, the interesting thing is I put a lot of stuff on YouTube.
Okay.
Certain forms of meditation that I learned. And then I had this weird dream. And I'm sending light trying to send light and love to everybody, surrounding with love and light. And in the middle of my dream, I'm dreaming somebody's like sending darkness around everybody. I could not believe that was even a concept, that it could be happening. And I'm thinking to myself, so then I started going back to my little YouTubes and saying private, because maybe not everybody should be watching these meditations yet. Maybe they're too advanced for the general public, or for the people who are angry and violent.
Well, again, that's what I'm suggesting. Filtering, discernment's appropriate.
Discernment, yeah.
Appropriate filters, both going out and going in. And that's different than what I believe was this kind of naive fourth chakra, we'll all just love each other and everything will be cool. I'm just suggesting that we have to look at, out on the web, that's us, that's our brain, that's all the things we don't want to see about ourselves. And ourselves, I don't mean your personal life and your personal life and your personal life, but who we are as a culture in the world. And we have to, if we're going to build this global brain, we're going to have to deal with the cancer nodes in it as well, or else we're just going to walk right over the edge. So I want to make sure we get to the top.
Oh, I just wanted to ask you quickly, how did it get called spam? What was the reason for that? I guess I'm just curious. What?
Well, spam is again, not to offend our friends in Austin, Minnesota, but it's the idea of
Spam, yeah, okay.
Yes, but it was the idea of all the junk pieces
All
are
the
thrown
junk,
together in the
gotcha.
can.
Now I got it.
In the Army it had another phrase which we won't use, but
No, we
this
Thanks, okay.
okay,
good.
it was just
Yeah.
grind it up, put it in, and call it food. Okay, so if we're at this fifth level space, and again, it's a beautiful thing that you're sending out truth on the net. We talked about the fifth level work of discernment, of understanding truth from false. That's a more subtle understanding. It has to be grounded in some spiritual understanding, some deep work on our own consciousness. So we move into that place of looking at the failures of the fifth level, in terms of this was built on trust and people abuse trust. So we have to begin to find ways to cope with that, and I'm suggesting the ways that's done is to build networks of peer communities that trust each other, and that there's some, whether it's initiation or reference process that says you've done something to expose yourself to somebody who I love. They've seen inside you, and so now I've seen inside them, and together we could do that. And that's kind of the metaphor of MySpace. Why it's again, it's not done the way it was supposed to be private. The Facebook originally was just at Harvard and then was going to be the Ivy League schools, and then they commercialized it. But originally these were going to be based on communities that already existed. People trusted each other. And the abuse of it is, again, taking these trusted forms and putting it out without discernment, and then they're turned to garbage. So all spiritual teachings, and again, I'm sitting in the metaphysical library, and I've done this in bookstores surrounded by either pictures of the great saints or bookshelves full of great teachings. So I'll just pull in the energy from up that other room. Many of these teachings, let us say, make the case that what is metaphysics and metaphysical study, of course, is to see the physics beyond the physics, to see beyond the falsehoods. So sixth level consciousness, sixth level thinking, sixth level awareness is that place in which we move into communicating and understanding that even if we know the truth, we finally cleared our fifth chakra communication transponder, and we know truth from falsehood, and then we have this spiritual awakening. We say, oh my God, there's a million truths. Oh my God, there's a truth deeper than the truth, that everything I understood and believed in is real. And the bang on the head, the enlightenment, the crack of the Zen master, the psychotropic experience for some of us, whatever it might be, that, oh my God, I see more than I thought I understood. So sixth level consciousness, of course, is about codes, and understanding the codes of reality are not what we think they are. It's about seeing beyond the beyond. Sixth level consciousness is in spiritual practice, or in mantra we do net in Sanskrit, nete, 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 not this, not this, not this, not this, not this, beyond this. Gate, gate, para son gate, 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 para son gate, beyond the beyond, beyond the beyond, the bodhisattva of seeing beyond this reality. So all of these practices about seeing past illusion, opening another door, opening the door that you think you finally got it, there's another door. And of course that's the metaphysical hunger that people write these great treatises or channel wisdom. It's always, there's a level above the level above the level. So fifth level, again, was about recognizing the responsibility to be in truth. It's a very radical leap to move into sixth level consciousness. Ken Wilber, then we're into second tier thinking, as you would call it, that we all of a sudden understand that from the divine, our divine connection, there's more truths, there's more realities than the one that we operate in. And most of us, again, may have a glimpse of that in some deep meditation, in the dream that you had, in some awareness. Kids get it in popular culture, of course, with the idea of life being we're on the matrix, and that there's, if one had to look at sixth chakra shadow, that yes, there's another reality. This is not the real reality, but back in my first and second chakra insecurities, I'm going to project that it's got to be some evil forces or someone else creating it, as opposed to what I think wisdom tradition says is these are co-created realities. That we create our DNA through our very acts of thinking. Sri Aurobindo understood that. Again, he believed that our cells were changing, our DNA was changing, and his teachings were about going up and experiencing the light and then having the courage to come back down into the cellular level and live it. And so, this is a place of leaving and coming back, of seeing beyond illusion, seeing that reality is made up of pixels that we assemble ourselves. Consciousness studies have told us that, the idea of that there's a movie projector or a movie screen inside the brain and that somehow we're seeing these things come in and we're just registering them is totally false, and that all of last 20 years of brain scan and consciousness research says no, what happens in the brain is that the brain, through its memory, has a matrix of what the world looks like, and then when the eye opens, it grabs bits of data, outline information, color information, motion information, face recognition. We're very programmed to recognize faces, pulls all that in, runs it through the thalamus, runs it through other parts of our awareness, mixes it with our balance information, and constructs a reality, just as we do with our pixelated images that we run our Photoshops and our digital compression tools. This videotape going to be digitally compressed and manipulated. So that kind of awareness that life is, that what we're seeing is a construct our technology is creating for us externally in our digital media. Somebody asked me about the raster scan of high definition television versus the old black and white, analog television. So digital television is a different way of seeing. It's not the heart center anymore. It's about understanding that we can see deeper and we can see wider and we can see finer. The truth about high def in my business when I worked in television is that now you see every wrinkle in the starlet's face. You can see that the set behind them was painted and isn't real. It's cost us millions, as a system, millions of dollars to convert because we can't send the same old crap anymore because people are seeing more. They're seeing more than we wanted them to see. So it's this great medium. And of course, on the image below is Second Life on the lower left. Again, I've gotten their permission to use that. That's that young people are creating avatars and going out into other realities in multiplayer games, in realities, in places, interacting with others in a virtual space. So virtual reality, as it's negative, we can read all the social dilemmas of kids spending 14, 15 hours a day in those spaces. I believe that's partly because the kids coming in today are pre-wired for that, and there's some understanding that there's got to be more, and our job is to teach them there's got to be more grounded and connected and with discernment and all of the things of those embodiment work and why weekends of working with young people are important. But they get it, and they operate in that idea of other realities. I'll read you a paragraph or two from 6th level, and then we'll wrap it up and take some questions. Sixth level thinking is by its nature holographic, holding all levels of greater information and the energy-filled meta-universe in awareness and appreciation. It is free to see deeper, to tune across the whole range of consciousness. This level of digital Dharma is about learning to communicate beyond surface forms, to connect soul to soul. In energy yoga, this communications transponder is centered at the third eye, the organ of visual, psychic, and intuitive perception. Its element is light, and its task is to open our imagination to an expanded awareness that sees through what Sri Aurobindo calls the eye of complete union. From this place, the old habitual mindset no longer satisfies. All level of reality, all ways of seeing the world are open for fearless exploration. Co-creation and collaboration are the social organizing principles at this level. Sixth level digital Dharma requires one to widen one's reception channels, to take in more frequencies, to consider other truths than the one that you're most attached to. On an inner spiritual level, Buddhism calls the sixth level range of perception Dharma Dhatu, the realm of all dharmas, where possible past, present, and future realities coexist, where what we call darkness and light are united once again. It is a state of peace where emptiness and the rising of form are in balance. To see one object is to see all objects, or in William Blake's words, to see a world in a grain of sand, in heaven in a wild flower. I'm going to just jump ahead and read a poem. The mystic's eye sees beyond superficial appearance and personal characteristics, beyond habitual concepts, to the true self in the other. So I mentioned that fourth chakra was about seeing a piece of yourself as the other. Fifth chakra is dealing with the consequence of being connected to the other. And sixth level awareness, of course, is realizing the other and you are the same one thing. To see the true self in the other. To what the Hindus call Advaita, the true state of non-duality. To the underlying light of consciousness which modulates all reality. It understands intuitively what Marshall McLuhan told us 50 plus years ago. Pay attention to the underlying medium and do not get hung up on each of the specific messages. As a Sufi poet Rumi wrote more than 750, now 800 years ago, we need to remember that when, in Rumi's words, a strong wind blows, it rushes through windows, lifts carpets and levitates straw. A pond looks like rippled armor. Branches, leaves, and trees dance. All these things look different. But in root and reality, they're one. They're just the wind. So this level consciousness, of course, understands that that which we see and that which we manifest is all the same one thing. As the evening is progressing, I want to just tap the seventh and won't do it quite as fast. I mean, as slow, do it quicker. Again, in spiritual consciousness, when one opens the third eye and begins to see that all reality is one and the same, and then we do further work, we get up into that 7th, 8th, 11th, 12th chakra, way up the connecting point. It's a place of divine connection. It's the place of unity consciousness. It's the place where prayer works. It's the place where channeling happens. It's the place where we can leave the body and commune with our ancestors and come back down again if we're doing our job right. The portal above. And we don't have as tangible a technology for me to point to other than 3 or 4 trends. And I met a young man in Portland who's 26 years old, and he kind of kicked my butt when I got into this, and saying, you guys, you're trying hard, you're working at it, but let me take you over to our lab and let me show you what we're really working on, in our generation of connectivity and this global understanding. So, I say this with some humility that it's the best I can do from where I was and where I grew up, and I started thinking about these things. So 6th level is about seeing. 7th level is about actually operating back and forth in this place of unity. One of the first metaphors I like to think about is that if we create this global intelligence and we're all on it and we all can see it and we're all connected, then one of the trends that's happening is something called grid computing. And in grid computing, we take a problem that is so complex that no one computer can do it, and we, through the internet, through this network, we parse it out and we divide it up into thousands and thousands and thousands of other computers, and they run the program in the background. Run the program in the background, so you think you're doing word processing in the front or balancing the books, or maybe it's a corporate computer, but in the background they've agreed to take a piece of the problem and grind it up. And so one of the first ones was this search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the SETI project that ran through the 1990s, where you could agree to help search for life up there. Actually, I think there's a wonderful metaphor that we'll use. We've got these radio telescopes pointed up to the heavens, opening our Earth's crown chakra to see if anything is coming down. And we did it by parsing the problem and connecting with each other. And I think that that's part of our challenge in this awareness, is to think of ourselves as partially in this grid computing model where the divine is trying to figure out what it is. And of course, the problem is too big for any one divine entity to figure out. So the only way to do it, of course, is to create beings to have the problem run in the background. And so I think part of what I like to think about is that we are these little computers who think we're doing our own thing, but of course in the background we're running the real problem, which is what is consciousness and what is reality and what is the divine. The other part about the grid is that, as was discovered with the first wave of Napster, is that once we're all interconnected, and it may have been, again, for kind of silly, selfish reasons, but this idea that anything that's out there is always out there, and that you can't hold, as the Grateful Dead used to do, give the music away and sell the t-shirts. Well, that was the Napster model, that the web held the intelligence. You want it, you ask for it, and it's downloaded. And of course, that's been cheated and turned around and turned into the secret. But basically, it's a grid computing model of sort of knowing what to ask for, and this thought that, of course, it will come to you. And of course, we know that from Napster that you don't have to put it out there. You have to know what's the code and where to get it and how to be receptive. And so I think we're going to be seeing a lot of not just movies and video, but all kinds of intelligence. The Wikipedia model, the libraries of the future where the data is held out in the network and we can get it anytime we want, is a great spiritual metaphor for that seventh level connection. And there's also a playful quality about that. Seventh level, of course, recapitulates the first. You know, if the first chakra is about connecting to the earth, and the seventh is connecting to the divine. And in the first, it was knowing the earth, knowing where we are. So we've created a seventh level technology called GPS that we can wander around and from space know exactly where we are. Technology that we're putting in our cars and in our cell phones. There's a cell phone now that's sold in Indonesia that rings when it's time to pray to Mecca, and then you lay it on the ground and it points to Mecca because, of course, it has a GPS receiver in it and it tells you where to go. There's cell phones being tested now where you enter your friends list, and if your friend is at a coffee shop nearby, it gives you the map of how to meet with each other. So this idea of geospatial awareness, that we're in this space, we can download what we want, but yet we know where we are and who we are at the same time. That grid computing turned on its head, that we are all one, but we know our identities and we know how to find each other. I was at a home show. I had to get this picture. That's a microwave oven with an internet screen with a web browser on the front. And the idea, of course, is that you download the recipes and then you just tap the internet browser and it downloads the information to the microwave telling it what to cook because you've figured out what's in it. There's a refrigerator that was on the show that has a web address. And, you know, the early webcams, of course, were things like cameras on a coffee pot in a lab, and you could watch it, or the fishbowl. Well, these were refrigerators that had sensors in them that you clipped to the milk container. When the milk was getting sour, it sent you a text message saying, it's time to buy more milk. And, you know, the peanut butter is getting low. And the pizza is no longer in the pizza box in the dormitory, you know. And so these ideas of putting intelligence into appliances, we go a step further and we're seeing putting intelligence into clothing. My wife's a textile professor and she's been showing me these living textiles that have blood chemical sensors in them and actually have heart, AHD, you know, heart defibrillators, ADH, whatever, the automatic heart defibrillators, AHDs, built into the fabric. So you wear them and it sends messages back, and it can, you know, if your doc reads the code right and says, oh my God, this person needs some help, can send a message to your shirt, and your shirt gives you a shock. So what does that mean? I mean, we can read the negatives about these things, but I'd like to suggest that we're in this process of creating sentience in non-sentient things. Well, again, the greatest, that's in the shadow world, that's Minority Report, you know, where the seers can see somebody's brain ahead of time, and you walk down a wall and it's got the advertisements just to you because you've got a little chip in you that's telling everything about yourself. That's the shadow, and we see it in the arts. But I'd like to suggest that, again, from a spiritual point of view, that's kind of what we've been hungry for on the divine level, of course, is that we're seeing that we act with each other, that the reality we create around us is something that is really created just for us at each moment. And as all the teachers have told us, that every tree, every rock, every piece of water, every flowing water has its own intelligence. We just don't get it, and we're doing it in mechanical nanotechnology and putting out in chips. But I think the mirror reflection is to remember that we exist in this space of great intelligence, and it's all around us. Finally, these last two things I just want to explain. That's on Alexanderplatz in Berlin, and the bunch of computer hackers got together and, you know, put Wi-Fi wireless nodes in each of the offices controlling the lights, and then wired it up to people's cell phones and invited them to come and play Pong and to send messages to their friends through making this building a living billboard. And so this was I Love Fritz, or whatever, you know, this is the middle symbol, but it was a 16-story building with 8 or 10 windows, and they just created this little pixel thing. And we're seeing a lot of community sculptures now that I'm familiar with that actually are interactive, that people, there's a sculpture in Wales that people can call up and send their love messages to, and then it changes the color based on how people are feeling and the temperature and all of that. So this idea that our intelligence becomes part of art is really part of the playful side of seventh chakra awareness, so that maybe this is also God's art creation, and that our intelligence that we think is separate is really part of the divine's artistic plan. The last piece of the umbrellas, that's a project called Umbrella Net, and what they do is they go into a city area and they give out 200 umbrellas, and each umbrella has an LED flashlight that can shine red, yellow, and blue. It's connected with a little a Bluetooth receiver that's good for like 10 feet. And when the Bluetooth receivers are trying to communicate with each other, they go yellow. When they're not connected, they're red, and when they're connected, they're blue. And then they invite people from the buildings to look from up above, and of course it looks, what you're seeing is intelligence flowing as each of these umbrellas representing the person underneath and their hunger for communication begin to form networks and light up and change. And they have dancers doing this and other things. So this seventh level place is also a place of joy and playfulness. It's about abundance and downloading. It's a place of seeing the act of communication as something beautiful unto itself, and their act of being. And within that, knowing, of course, at all times, both our individuality and where we are. And it's the place in which we connect our first and seventh chakras together, our earth star in the center of our place of being, that first boundary that we drew of our own aliveness, and our universal connection up above, and welcome the downloading of spirit, and because now we have the right filters and we know what to ask, and we've done our practices, and we have humility, and that we can ask and receive divine blessing. And that, of course, is my goal, and I know it's your goal. And with that, I say good night. Thank you. And we'll take, we could take some questions up front.
I was, when we were talking about Michael Mead earlier, he said something that's coming up for me now, that this kind of digital ecology is like we're teachers and God is learning from us. Does that kind of make sense to you?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I like to think of the divine as watching these little nodes try to communicate with each other and bumping up and hitting things and trying to put the packets in the right order and figure out the whole meaning of things. And yeah, it's a two-way street. So what I'd like to do is get out of this hot seat and come back in the back, and I'm really happy to chat. We'll pull up some chairs, and if anybody wants an autographed book, I will be happy to sell you one and give you my web and blog information. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.